Today, talk about what if there was a disease from the Arctic. People would say this is pretty unlikely to happen. But what's to say in Canada or Siberia, some disease gets right out? We'll be using this 2024 as a thing, and basically, we accidentally caused the pandemic 2024, the disease X people are worrying about. Also, this video is an alternate scenario and does not have any basis in real life. What to say disease, they find a disease, but for some reason they didn't know, but they let it loose. Weeks later, an unidentified disease in Siberia has been found. Thousands are getting sick, and several people are dying. Humanity has never dealt with this disease before, and Russia so basically now wants to finish the war in Ukraine as fast as possible now, because this disease is gonna spread throughout Russia and Mongolia as well. Well, so basically Putin and Zelensky, once the disease starts gaining more notoriety and starts spreading in other countries as well. Well, yeah. So the first areas to really report the disease is mostly Russia with the Siberia. Yeah. Very soon, Korea, Mongolia, China, Japan, Thailand, and Vietnam and the US all report this disease. Considering that this disease was extinct until it was revived from the ice as well. East Asia will be the first country, will have all the first countries to be affected. China will, of course, use lockdowns to prevent the disease spread. It will eventually spread to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and the Central Asian countries, except for Turkmenistan, which refused to report any cases. Afghanistan also starts to report cases, but Western countries as well. Well, it is now March of 2024, and the disease is now spreading to Europe. Russia puts itself on national lockdown alongside China and Japan, drawing parallels to another certain disease in 2020. This Arctic disease that was freed by some unlucky scientists realized that this disease could destroy modern civilization. Russia is already brought down onto its knees by this disease as well. Yeah, basically we're doing play game, but not in the actual game itself. Hundreds of thousands of people have been getting sick in Russia. Thousands have been dying. The world death rate in the very beginning is very skewed towards Russian numbers. Russia having the highest total, following China and the US. The following China, no, which will have around like 600, Korea 200, and Japan 300, and Vietnam 30, and Thailand around like 2 as well. But as it starts to hit more like populated areas, the disease starts to go global. Like with COVID, this disease is declared a pandemic. And and societies deal with this disease very differently as well. The countries with the least amount of cases are the countries that refuse or won't report any cases. For example, the North Korean regime, many people have said the country of North Korea has discovered cases, but North Korean regime will not tell its citizen about it. 2 months after the disease broke out, almost every country in the world, besides some African countries and some more remote areas, have reported the disease. And some countries that have successfully been able to repel this disease as well. Places like Indonesia and other countries in the world start to report said disease as well. The disease goes on for a while, but what are the societal effects of this disease as the disease continues to spread global. First, research into a vaccine will be necessary as well. Well, also conspiracy theories about the disease's origins, even though all of the news sites say the disease was from a frozen iceberg. A lot of conspiracy theories say that the Russians created the disease, especially both Democrat and Republican politicians and EU politicians say that it is, basically create a conspiracy theory about the disease, basically saying, oh, it so happened to start in Russia, so Russia could win the war in Ukraine, so we can't, as well, or stuff like that. Also, because of the effects of the COVID pandemic, less people are actually obeying the lockdowns. Less people are obeying the lockdowns, which is leading to more people dead because people want to, believe in conspiracy theories about the disease that is going around. In many poor countries, because the disease is higher death rate than COVID, societal breakdown in places like Africa or Central Asia or Latin America starts to begin. Again. And places like the US as well, due to conspiracy theories, mostly that's the US one. But more poor countries, society starts to break down. This becomes the second Black Death or the second plague. This is going to cause a massive wake-up call to humanity about our society and the way our society should be run. At the end, nearly 1 billion people die from the Arctic Russian disease. The worst affected region is Africa due to famine. Also an extra 200-300 million people in poor countries also died to a lack of food. Because of this disease's global impact, a lot of countries will shut the border to immigrants. For example, we usually use in the US, for example, the US closes both the southern and northern border. This goes around 20 or 30 years as well. And this happens in a lot of countries. It is because they don't want the disease to spread across borders. There's as well. The biggest example of this happens in Asia. Western countries Asia and Africa and Latin America, unlike Western countries, will have extreme strict border patrol. Even North Korea like border patrol, where they don't want anyone in the country. For example, Saudi Arabia will likely collapse as a country. I do not foresee a country like Saudi Arabia surviving this. People will revolt against the Saudi Arabian government, and I can foresee a lot of governments simply just collapsing or being destroyed. So a lot of Middle Eastern oligarch countries will probably collapse. Iraq and Syria will probably collapse. Central Asian nations and Russia will probably collapse as well, as this will be referred to the disease that brought Russia to its knees. As well, a country like Ukraine will also collapse, which means the whole war in Ukraine was pointless. Belarus and Moldova would collapse as well. These countries are not very rich either. And China, and even a country like China would collapse. China has always been struggling with a lot of problems, including protests as well. And, people having a very poor quality of life as well. And of course, without China, North Korea would collapse as well. Leaving Mongolia the sole country, as well as Mongolia simply just exists. A country, Laos would collapse. Laos and Burma would fracture and collapse as well. And Africa would collapse essentially as a continent of independent states as well. With the more well-off countries like Botswana surviving this, and Namibia or Rwanda, as those countries have more cohesive societies, but most of Africa would cease to function, especially countries that are already on the brink of collapse, like Sudan, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Libya are such examples of countries that would collapse from the societal strain as well. The thing is, more of these countries did not really exist. Okay, Europe would go into mass riots as well after the disease is felled as well. So this is the year 2060, and many of these African countries and Middle Eastern countries are destroyed. Latin America goes into a dark age where essentially, Latin America was becoming a area of prosperity, but this disease brought them to the brink. Many Central American nations also collapse as well, along with Haiti and Venezuela, but the government simply does get replaced and the countries still exist as well. The left leaning countries will become more right leaning, for example, Mexico or Brazil, but the more right leaning countries will flip to a more left leaning government. South America is weird as well, but South America will be struck hard by it. The country I do see surviving is America, as America and many countries that are not really dependent on outside imports as well can survive the impact of this. And now what would the world look like? New Russian states or countries that were created from Russia emerged as well. There was no more Ukraine either, and Moldova does not exist anymore, which means Romania is able to conquer southern Ukraine without much resistance as well. Finland, Greater Finland appears. Taking over a lot of the area. A new Russian state appears. Siberia basically being destroyed. A new Siberian state is created. The Republic of China takes over a lot of southern Taiwan, and Korea finally unifies after the collapse of the Northern Korean regime due to this disease and due to the lack of Chinese support. But a country like Burma would split into its various ethnicities. These create multiple states. I do not know the exact ethnic lines of Burma, but Laos would cease to exist as well, and Tibet would finally be an independent state as well. Then we have all this free, unclaimed land. The Iranian government would collapse, but it would be replaced as Iran or Persia is an important area of the world. Countries like Israel would use this opportunity to take even more land, and Palestine would not exist anymore. Obviously, a new Arabian kingdom would appear to replace the said kingdoms in the Arabian world. Turkey would try to basically create a new Ottoman Empire along with Iran. The new Iranian government also create a new empire as well. Israel would finally get the site. Egypt would exist, but it would have the same borders it does have now. It would lose a lot of control over these desert territories as well. Egypt was also one of the worst hit countries by this disease, and the disease spread most in very densely populated areas as well. Somalia would basically collapse, which means Ethiopia would be able to create puppet states in Somalia. The East African Federation would simply exist out of survival, and the cooperation between these countries now is essentially because East African Republic or East African Federation is a country that essentially is now existing. More stable countries like Botswana and Namibia take large swaths of former South Africa as several South African states form. Botswana creates a large influence over these two countries here. Yeah. I can see the southern part of South Africa being taken over by Botswana, as they are very similar in ethnicity and demography. I can see small African states forming as well. But countries like Cameroon would probably not survive, or Ghana, Benin, as most of these countries are mostly dependent on foreign aid. Liberia would probably survive as Liberia has existed as a nation for a long, long time. Same thing with Morocco and Algeria. Libya would have there would be two northern Libyan states as well. And Africa would basically be an empty continent with the more prosperous nations still existing. Eritrea would also cease to exist as a state and thus be annexed into Ethiopia at large, giving Ethiopia a large coastline. And Djibouti would basically become a Ethiopian puppet state. Yemen would have split in half as two nations as well. There would also be a Nubian state, or basically just a modern day Sudanese state as well. That's not related to the modern day Sudanese state. And also another country in Mozambique would exist, and Madagascar would exist as well. I can see small African kingdoms being created in the collapse, after the collapse as well. Well, creating new opportunities to trade and expand in the future. Now let's go to the Americas. The Americas is literal hell as well. Latin America, like the rest of the world, the population literally just halves as well, but the birth rates also still be put. Actually, the birth rates globally actually increase as the world population goes from 7 billion to around 4 billion in a couple of decades. This is due to natural population decline alongside the disease crippling the world population as well, and also mass famine in the poor third world countries as well. Countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan also collapse, being absorbed into the greater Indian state, create a massive prosperity for the Indian state as well. Afghanistan simply just exists as well. I can foresee new Central Asian states rising out of the ashes as well. Here, creating new countries and new areas as well. Mongolia would expand into Inner Mongolia very quickly by as well. Here, the new Russian leadership is something that countries like the USA warn about. And basically, the new Russian leadership takes a lot of former Russian land as well. But they aren't a very powerful country, as they do lose a lot of the more, Muslim minority areas here, in these areas becoming independent states here as well. And also several Chinese states appear as China enters a new warring states period as well that could last decades, which means China's population will continue to decline as well, especially in these inner territories fighting against the democratic government of the Republic of China, or now known or as formerly known as Taiwan. Countries like Indonesia would collapse as well. Well, Indonesia would split into various ethnicities on these islands, or various states. The New Guinea island would finally unite into one country as well. Papua New Guinea was basically just kept alive by Australian aid. Australia and New Zealand survive as countries as well. That what has happened to Africa as well. Some radicals literally make Wakanda an actual real country by Ethiopia. Yes, Wakanda is now an actual real country. Some radicals just create Wakanda as well. But again, the real country of Wakanda has no resources. So it's not really going to go too far. A new Congo state is formed as well. And states that are bordering the East African state are created as well. These African nations continue to expand throughout the decades as countries like Morocco start to expand south into sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel region. Mauritania no longer exists as a nation, it's just a part of Morocco as well. and basically these desert people become an independent state as well. Nigeria basically creates a massive West African state, conquering all of its smaller rivals. Nigeria was like one of the few African nations to really survive this catastrophe, also conquering Equatorial Guinea and Gabon, creating the first African empire since forever. And Liberia also becomes a larger nation as well. You know, Nigeria's population never goes to the apocalyptic numbers of 700 million due to the disease and mass famine as well. And Nigeria's population actually halves to just around 100 million people. It is still a lot of people in the country, as Nigeria is basically the China of Africa, or India of Africa, basically a large country in terms of population as well. Europe has basically elected more far-right candidates. The EU essentially falls, and nationalism takes over in Europe. Scottish independence finally takes over. Ireland is united as a single entity. The Catalonia is independent. Greater Germany is formed. The Benelux becomes one. Belgium splits apart. That's who no one really expected. I think no one really expected that. Everyone did. Belgium does not really need to be a country, but Belgium basically is absorbed into France and the Netherlands. There is no reason to keep this country around. Poland starts to create an empire, joining with Lithuania and the other Slavic states as well. Hungary takes back former Ukrainian lands in a war of aggression against Romania, and the Balkans further balkanize, creating a smaller Turkish state here. Thrace finally gains its independence, and for some reason the northern part of Serbia gains independence, and Republika Srpska gains independence as well. And a part of Ukraine, for some reason, breaks away from Romanian government as well. Poland also starts to invade the weaker Baltic states of Latvia as well. And starts to invade former Belarus, create a Polish empire as well. The Nordic countries stay mostly the same except for the expansion of Finland. This area also gains its independence, and Russia is basically just gone at this point. Russia is now just a figment of the history books, but one day Russia may rise again as well in the future. And this is basically just the rump state of Russia. And the new global powers seem to be the new USA, which took out Canada, as Canada basically becomes China 2.0, in terms of, leadership. Canada basically just collapses. Quebec is an independent state, separate from the US as well. And we'll be saying, what happens to the US? The US split apart, but the US does annex Canada as well. Basically create a mega state in North America. Mexico enters its own war state period between the cartels and the government. The government thankfully wins against the cartels with the US aid and help as well. And also Venezuela fails to take over Guyana because of this disease. Venezuela is planning to take over Guyana as well. Also, Haiti becomes a part of the Dominican Republic because Haiti just doesn't exist anymore. Which means 200 years of Haiti existing as a separate country doesn't exist anymore. Also, Hawaii and Puerto Rico gain independence, but the U.S. does gain the very sparsely populated areas of Canada as well. Greenland is relinquished into an independent state as well. And also Sicily and several parts in northern Italy and southern Italy gained their independence as well, which means an Italian state no longer exists anymore, and a mass exodus of Europeans fearing nationalism in Europe flee to the US and Mexico and Brazil for some reason. Heck, they even flee all the way to places like India and the East African Federation as well, alongside even places like Australia as well. The U.S. becomes basically by 2100 its own civilization, sin, sin. Well, basically a new American ethnicity starts to appear, and Quebec still stays mostly just French people. It's not too surprising. And eventually, over time, the peoples of Central America, for example, Mexico, doesn't really identify as mestizo. They just identify as Mexican ethnicity. Kind of like how basically Europeans identify as their own countries. Latin America becomes the same thing, like Europe. Okay, you have a Brazilian ethnicity, a Bolivian ethnicity, no, Brazilian, Bolivian, Paraguayan, Uruguayan, Argentine, Chilean. You have a Peruvian ethnicity, Ecuadorian ethnicity, Colombian ethnicity, Venezuelan ethnicity as well, Cuban, Puerto Rican ethnicity, but Haiti does not survive, and eventually many Haitians are forced to assimilate into Dominican Republic, and no one has to worry about Haiti and natural disasters anymore as well. Now let's talk about the inevitable. Birth rates. I do think birth rates after a catastrophe like this happen to increase. The world goes out of the degenerate era, which is referred to by 2100, that basically all the way up until 2030s, it was a degenerate era. Well, and that's basically how that era of history is looked upon it as well. Well, yeah. Well, basically, a lot of conspiracy theories are floated around. A lot of polarization in the actual cultures of the country, as well. But no one historian was predicting Canada to collapse before the U.S. government. Basically, what happened is instead of a civil war, there were massive riots and massive things as well. But basically, once Donald Trump won election in 2024, Donald Trump basically made himself the dictator of America, and basically made America a military dictatorship. Again, America falling into military dictatorship is plausible given what happened with the pandemic, with this pandemic being much more deadly than COVID. Basically, the military is used to quell down the riots. And basically, America becomes the first country to truly recover from this disease, despite losing around 100 million people. Also, millions of people throughout the 2050s, do emigrate from America. I actually foresee it happening in the normal timeline, but especially from Canada as well as the U.S. as well. But there will be no Canadian ethnicity, because Canada does not exist. The last bastion of former Canada is Quebec, and Quebec is so different as well. Also, Vancouver, is it Vancouver like here? Also becomes like its own city state. So basically, you have Giga USA, and then you have this Vancouver, which Vancouver still stays an very ethnically diverse area, and basically becomes a Singapore, essentially. Singapore, a lot of people in Vancouver are Asian, which again is very similar to the actual ethnicity of there's a large white European population and a large mixed race, mostly mixed Asian and white. So basically, it's Singapore 2.0. That's basically what Vancouver is. So basically, Vancouver is basically a Singapore 2.0. Singapore, of course, still survives as a nation. And now we have countries like Greater India becoming a real thing as well, which would be very interesting to see how Greater India performs. Basically, in the 2030s, India has greater national unity. After Pakistan, Bangladesh, basically disappear as well. But the problem is, I don't see the country surviving too long with the religious divide between Muslims and Hindus as well. There was probably a reason why Pakistan was created as a separate state. I do foresee this time's Pakistan or the Muslim state just becoming a separate state, simply out of necessity, and a Bengal state down here. But India is a very diverse country, and Greater India could exist for a while, making India one of the great superpowers of the world. World. Yeah. Yeah. Now let's talk about a country like Israel. Every group of people has been affected horribly, but Israel finally received its dream of basically create a Jewish ethno state. Basically, the Jews have the old nation state and have basically persisted for a long time. Since basically they're surrounded by more friendly countries like Turkey, Key, or surrounded by very weak nations like this Arabic state here or the weaker Egypt here. Israel is finally able to put out its full plans for create a greater Israel. Also, there will be a war between these two nations, Algeria and Morocco, cemented themselves as further enemies. Basically, Morocco and Algeria create a newer border. After Morocco wins the war against Algeria, basically create a new border, and basically they just take worthless desert with like two people. So as well. But Algeria also starts to expand into some of the lesser areas here, especially the Sahara nation with like that's like two people here. Here. And Algeria's borders are created differently, but Algeria is still a actual country that exists here. Also, French Guyana gains independence, so French Guyana is an independent country as well. Basically, the world will be very different, and the world goes back. That is a new golden age in 2100. Birth rates are much higher. There's a massive baby boom in the 2070s, and history might repeat itself again, but again as well. There was also a massive war in Europe, which the US was involved in, which caused the breakup of Italy and also caused Wales to leave the UK, as Britain and Italy were the aggressors in this time as well. Also, Slovenia Italy had to pay Slovenia reparations as well, and the Greater German state annexes South Tyrol as well. The Greater German state is just another American ally. Basically, the spheres of influence will be going over in this at the end. This is the end of the video. But basically, the U.S. sphere of influence, you have Quebec, Greenland, Mexico, Cuba. The Communist Party is gone in Cuba. A lot of South America and Central America. There is immigration between Central America still and the U.S. as the U.S. becomes more Latinized, but most of it is usually higher level workers as the Central America and South America become much more richer. So mostly it is the more wealthy people who go to the country, as the U.S. puts a better emphasis on legal immigration as well. And France and Germany and Morocco continue to be some of America's biggest allies as well. Also, a rival alliance is coming out with Poland, the new Russian state, Hungary, Romania, Crimea, and this Ukrainian state as well, and this Ukrainian state and this Central Asian state as well, alongside Israel. As America and Israel fell out, so they joined this alliance as well, along with Turkey as well. There's also the Indian sphere of influence, which mostly is these Burmese states, this Chinese state here. This map is basically the final result of the world in 2100 here, and Afghanistan and Iran as well. And India also has some influence over these Arabic states due to massive immigration from an Indian subcontinent, along with Britain, along with the London state. Yes. London basically becomes India 2.0 and Thailand as well. But the last newer superpower, the newer kid on the block, essential is the African superpower. Uh, the the African superpower, the East African Federation. A lot of the African diaspora, especially from the United States and South America, and ones that fled to Europe in the 2020s, a lot of them found opportunities in this African superpower. Considering the fact that Central Africa and many countries in Central Africa are basically only existing simply because of this country here. So basically, all these countries are in the sphere of influence of this new African nation, and also they're allies of Ethiopia, making them a very great regional bloc in Africa. Basically, outside the US, most of the alliances are regional as well. China has not unified yet, but Taiwan, or the former Republic of China, is now becoming a major player. The last communist country in the world is Vietnam, but Vietnam is communist in name only. And the new Chinese government also forms an alliance with Japan and the United Korea as well. Well, as basically now China and as China starts to try to reunify the continent with the help of Japan, Korea, and this state down here, and Vietnam as well. China is an emerging superpower, but the current global superpowers are India, the polar state, and the polar state is a regional superpower. But there's a new standoff, a new Cold War between India and the U.S., basically becoming the two sole superpowers in the world. U.S. has to worry about, India's influence in Europe as well, and a lot of Europe becoming more Indianized, especially this part of the UK, or this part of, actually not this part of Italy, but also they have the influence over Saudi Arabia, which really isn't geopolitically important anymore because oil is gone and has been replaced with renewable sources and, of course, nuclear energy as well. The threat of nuclear warfare is still there, but the 2100s may still be a huge problem with nuclear warfare, as most people in 2100 have kind of forgotten about the fears of nuclear warfare. And might actually try nuclear warfare if another world war happens. But if we want to see a part 2 of this series, I would very well encourage people to want to have a part 2 to the world series, as now we have the global alliances as well, and basically create an alternate timeline. Goodbye.